So Philip, really nice to have you again. And as we are talking, before starting to record the podcast, I think we have a lot of different areas to catch up on. But I think one area I want to deep dive, given your professional experiences, algorithms, and particularly about algorithmic control and how this line of software can essentially dictate what you see and what you don't see. So I wanted really to get it from an expert, someone that can explain how does it work really at a high level. How do algorithmic controls work when it comes to deciding if a piece of content can be surfaced or not?
hmm Yeah, what we call algorithm today are, all the little pieces of software that exist in all the apps you use that are trying to rank little bits and pieces of information. They can be, something someone shared on a social media. They can be a comment. They can be a link, a video, whatever, right? They have all these little bits of information and trying to decide where to put them on your phone screen or on your computer screen, which one should go on top, which one should be small, which one should be big. All of these little decisions are made today by what we call algorithms. They are pretty complex beasts, and the way in which they work is relatively simple. They have an objective in mind. They're trying to accomplish something, and they observe you, and they basically, from that, they learn how to accomplish what they're trying to accomplish. So that's a bit abstract. To make it a bit more concrete, an algorithm can try to keep you on the platform longer. The algorithm can be like, okay, I'd like that person to stay for as long as possible. So in that case, maybe they observed you in the past and they noticed that, hey, if I give that person a cat video, the likelihood that they stay on the platform is higher than if I give them, a long article about the COVID situation today, right? So they will pick the cat video instead of the article, and that's essentially how they work. They have this objective, they have the behaviors that you've adopted that they've observed, and they combine they learn from that, and they use that learning to achieve their objective. That's how it works.
Going back
Now,
to our, sorry,
sorry?
go ahead. Go ahead.
And it's that's how all algorithms have been designed up until now for a bunch of different reasons. But it's like it's one thing you can notice out of that is it's a very opaque system, right? You never get the opportunity to exchange with the algorithm, to try to understand what the algorithm learned about you, what their objective is. All of that is hidden, and you don't have access to it. So the end result is you have this technological environment, this phone screen, this computer screen that is controlled by something, and naturally the way in which it will control it will have a big impact on the decisions you make, but you have absolutely no view into how this is happening.
If we look at the past history, right, thinking back to our time at Google together, right, you were like a founding member of the Chrome machine learning team. What do you think was what would you want to know back then that you know now, for instance, right? So how underappreciated was the power of these things you guys were building back then?
Yeah, I that's a great question. I think we didn't see how important these things would become. We design our page ourselves, and we put the little things here and there, and we try to think, hey, what would be the best location for the different components for the users. And as time went, it more and more of these decisions were being taken by algorithms. So I think we all knew that it was coming, but the impact this has, I don't think we saw it. Another thing that, I think something we kind of assumed back then, part of our job was, and I think it's because historically this has been the job of technology, was essentially to make everybody's life so much very easy, right? Everybody's should have, when technology is involved, it should all be automatic. You shouldn't have anything to do. Technology is going to take care of it. And it makes a lot of sense when the goal of technology is to help you get rid of a task you don't want to do. You don't want to fold your laundry. You wish you had a robot to do it for you. That makes a lot of sense. But we started using these same principles to build tools that were meant to help us decide how we would spend our time, which is not exactly trying to help us get rid of a task we don't want to accomplish. And if we're using these principles and say everything has to be automatic for these tools that are trying to help us figure out how to spend our time, then you get into this weird situation where you have sometimes I use the analogy of you have a friend who watches what you do, but refuses to listen to you, refuses to have a conversation with you. And only based on what you've done throughout the day, they're going to make their decision on how to be your friend. And that's kind of the situation we're in now, because technologists have basically ingrained this idea that things should be super easy to use. Things shouldn't have friction. If you ask something to the user, it is friction. Try to get rid of the question. Try to get rid of the interaction. And because we tried to do that so much in the products we built, we ended up with these systems where we very purposefully removed a lot of the potential interaction mechanisms.
Yeah, I think I forget where I learned this saying, but it's like any time you're asking a user to input data, that's a bug in essence. And what you're saying is that sometimes like you can over optimize for that philosophy. When did you realize that the over engineering, let's say, of these algorithms, particularly when it comes to content and content consumption, posed an issue? Was there like a specific moment, or was it like a gradual, slow build that you realized, hey, like this shouldn't be working the way it was originally intended to?
Yeah, I would say for me it was my own addiction to my content apps, to my device, to my phone, and seeing that addiction in my kids too. It's like in my sister's kids, and like how it's always a fight to try to get them away from there. This is where I realized, we really built something that almost feels like some form of drug, right? It has this, and we are optimizing to make the drug more and more and more powerful. Right? So my realization was a bit like that. I spend a lot of time I regret spending on these devices, and I see that in a lot of other people. And then it was all the other behaviors that tend to come out of this too, right? It's like I spend time being angry with people. So, hey, look, there's these hate comments going on Twitter. Or I spend time indulging in my fear. Oh, look, we have these filter bubbles, or we have these communities that form around like our joint fear of something, but we get really close together and we share that stuff. So it like seeing that all of these problems that people were pointing to were in some sense, in some way related to the fact that we have so much of the environment controlled by algorithms. This is where I realized, that might be something that needs a real shift, right? A real mindset shift, so that we at least try to experiment with something different.
Yeah. Have you ever thought about like long-term consequences of if we stay on this path, or is it a subject you're like, I prefer not to think about too much, prefer building and working on something to alleviate it?
Yeah, I think guessing what it would be like I think it's really hard. We saw some examples. I mean, I think last elections in the US were heavily influenced by algorithms, and you saw the result. I think that instead of technology making it easier for us to agree on some, for example, the climate crisis, like we still fight a lot around the things we disagree on, rather than aligning on the things we might all agree on. I think that's also a feature of these networks. I mean, these disagreements tend to be much more effective at achieving the algorithm's goal than people getting along and just like, oh, we get along, we move on. So yeah, I don't know what the long term consequences are, but I think we can already see pretty well that you have a lot of consequences today that are traceable to the way algorithms work.
Yeah. So maybe this is a good jumping off point to talk about your newest startup, right? To talk about Waverly. So yeah, maybe explain to the audience. I'd love to dive into Waverly, what you guys are doing. It seems like a super exciting project.
Yeah. So yeah, Waverly is basically we built what I would say is the first natural language based recommendation engine. So it's a stark departure from all the recommendations engines out there. There are again a ton of it. You just open an app on your phone. There's probably a bunch of recommendation engines already running to power the app. And yeah, so what we built is basically saying, hey, we'll build this engine that actually listens to you instead of watching you. And the way it works is basically people can talk about something they like, one of their goals, something that define the kind of experience they'd like to have on an app. And then our recommendation engine can take this into account instead of taking your behaviors into account in order to help you to organize the content so that you can achieve the goal you expressed. So that's the technology we built at Waverly. Now it is a technology. It's a piece of technology. It has to live inside a product. It has to live somewhere for people to use it. So that's the more challenging thing. But our thesis at Waverly is that in the current world, you have all these apps, and each of them come with their own recommendation engine that knows you based on the behavior you adopted on that specific app. And we are used to that. We open Facebook, we get a Facebook recommender. We open YouTube, we get their YouTube recommender. And they all know us slightly differently. But we believe there is a future in which this relationship between app and recommender will be reversed. So what I mean by that is people will first choose their algorithm, and then they will choose apps that will have to use that algorithm or rely on that algorithm in order to do their job. Because as these algorithms become so important at defining our experience, we believe that users will want to speak like once and be understood once, and for all their systems to do that. So that's what we are. This is where we're skating to. We're a bit early. That world isn't there. Some people are talking about it. You can hear Jack Dorsey say, "Hey, I would like Twitter to have an algorithm store," which is talking about the world in which this reversal would be possible. You have Apple that is pushing for more privacy. Like the natural next step in that is to actually have your algorithm there. But if we reach that world, it is obvious that this algorithm will need to be generic, right? Because it will need to adapt to all the apps. It will also need, like we believe, to be transparent and controllable so that you can know how it knows you. So it has that transparency. And if it doesn't know you in the way in which you want to be known, you can change it, you can control it. But these three things, when you put them together, it's really hard to imagine they will be controlled through some settings screen, like here's a lever, and because it has to be generic, it's like it has to work in so many different situations. That's why we're embracing natural language. For us, it's just like, yeah, talk about what's important to you, talk about what's working, what's not working. Just write it down or have a system help you write it down. This is what we're working towards. And that is what will drive all the algorithms downstream.
Yeah, it's fascinating, man. I'm listening to you speak. I guess you're early, and it might be a question that's a bit precocious, but like you have one avenue of building, let's say, a consumer-facing side, where like I can come in, sign up, and I put in, let's say, my information. and that poses its own host of challenges, right? I think you put in your last newsletter, the actions speak louder than words, right? So it's like, oh, I'm saying I'm doing this, but actually, I'm subscribing to all the virulent dopamine, click driven, tweets, basically.
Yeah.
So that's one angle, and then the other angle is build an algorithm that essentially you can sell to enterprise, right? So sell to Apple this generic algorithm, right? So is this a good way to maybe look at a distinction that you have in terms of potential approaches?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good way to look at it, right? There's for sure, yeah, this classic saying. I think watch what people do, don't listen to what they say, and it's it's um, it's hard to go against that, right? Especially if you're always thinking about selling, 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 selling. If you want to sell something, you'd rather just like hook them on what works, But the dopamine hits, as you said. I guess there is a space though for this deeper relationship. The real trust will be for that thing that understands that I don't want to steal your attention away. There's a point at which if I exploit that too much, you feel like I'm stealing your attention away. I'm not. And yes, you will give it, right? It's like, and then I could say, well, look, you behaved in this way, but it still feels to you when you stop and reflect on what happened as, no, you actually stole my attention from me. I didn't want to give it. I ended up giving it. And I wish I could have that time back. And this is where Waverly should play. You should feel like when Waverly is in control, it is never stealing. It doesn't mean that it won't be aware of what your behaviors are. Your behaviors are important. At least at a minimum, it can report on it, right? It can say, hey, you said you wanted to spend a lot of time reading economics news, but I watch you, and like that's not what you do. You watch cat videos. But that's great, right? It's like it will not start recommending cat videos even if you click on it, because it basically abides by this contract that you've written together, this what we call your collection of waves, right? This little contract that you've written with the Waverly algorithm is what drives it. But it can still watch your behavior and say, maybe you want to change the contract, right? Maybe you want these cat videos. And it never knows, right? If it's a habit you're trying to break, or if it really is how you wish your content environment was shaped. So that's where, this relationship can be built, and Waverly can help you write a contract with it so that you end up with the kind of thing you want. Now, this contract, the objective is really like, it shouldn't be in the hand of the person trying to sell you the product. As you said, it should probably, like the end product, it should be in the hands of the person who's selling you your trusted device, right? Is it Apple? Is it like something in front of Apple so that it works not only on your phone, but on your phone and your computer and all of that? Is it like, sometimes I think that, today people buy phones. Maybe in the future, the first thing they will buy is their algorithm. It's because it's going to have such an impact on everything downstream. So
Yeah.
yeah, I would, to your answer, is it something that Apple buys and integrates? Maybe, or maybe it's the thing that buys Apple. I don't know.
I think I love the ambition, like of like a $2 trillion company, but I think it's interesting because it's the selling to enterprise makes sense, let's say, on paper, like a dumb investor mindset, let's say, but it's also like you're selling to people that have a really deep conflict of interest, right? Like Apple also has iAds, right? Like they're in the news this past week for for this very issue, and then of course Google, well, like not that they're a bad company, but they're monetizing actively with ads, right? Which is its model. So it's tough to look at this way. Have you looked at maybe things like Chrome extensions, for instance, right? Like there's the app side, like the user front, but then maybe a Chrome extension to collect data, people that opt in to share this information.
Yeah, we've looked at integrating in people's current workflow in a bunch of different ways. Like a Chrome extension could be one, and like, unfortunately, a lot of our users are more on their phone, they're on their computer. What we're looking at, but we also looked at integrating into Slack or things like that. These are all options we're considering. Yeah, I think there's something you're hinting at that's also very interesting. Is this idea that the current business model of a lot of these companies is about getting your attention, like stealing your attention, right? You can almost say that an ad is by definition about stealing your attention. It's saying, I'm gonna, you don't have to pay for my product with money, but you have to pay for it with attention. I'm gonna, grab you for 5 seconds here or 15 seconds there, and just force you to watch this. And that's like very much is the current business model that the web has coalesced into, and it makes it hard to imagine a world in which this could change. You see, tendencies, trends that goes in the opposite direction. But yeah, we're really curious about these trends. There seems to be a bit of a comeback of micropayment platforms that might help with that, and basically help people realize that if you don't pay for the content with money, you end up paying for it with attention, and it might be a more subversive cost than what you think, especially when it starts driving your algorithms.
Yeah, I
There's
think.
also another interesting trend, which is in the creators economy. You see more and more people who will happily enter in a relationship with their creators, right? Through things like Patreon, Kickstarter, and Twitch. You have like Twitch and Facebook. You have payments to creators. You just feel like this is an alternate business model that is picking up, and that might have a chance of changing the status quo a bit.
Yeah, yeah. Interesting. Maybe I go back to your previous point about like ads, but advertising is also information, right? And if you look, back in the Google days, like pay per click's actually a pretty good model, right? You have the users, the advertisers, and the platform, and it's kind of a good trifecta. Who's to say that's a bad thing? But then that opens it up, right? So it's like obviously you guys are hiring a bunch of like natural language processing engineers for text, but then on the video side, right? Like you could see what a platform like YouTube can do. So I find that's one particular challenge. Um, to go back to your point about these new platforms, right? You mentioned Patreon and the subscription model. Have you guys looked at more emerging platforms, things like BitClout, that are obviously based on like these consensus protocols on Ethereum that allow you to bypass the existing business model and go to this entirely new one, albeit very nascent. But yeah, maybe something to explore on that front as well. I'd be curious to hear if you looked at that world at all.
Yeah, we've looked at blockchain based platform. They are interesting, but my take on them is I always find if you cannot imagine a world like a solution with like a trusted third party, then don't go to blockchain. Sometimes I feel people like imagine a solution on blockchain, um, that it would solve a problem that is not their current problem, right? I think what blockchain is really good at is if the problem is it's really hard to find a trusted third party for some form of transaction, then the blockchain based solutions can be good. But I find they're so much harder to understand. And when I think about them, I just imagine this oracle, okay, we have this trusted third party that we all agree is fair for everybody. Can we find a solution with that? And sometimes like we can't even find a solution with a trusted third party. Like, okay, we have to work harder. So that's why I'm like, probably like I looked at Enter Ledger, for example, which is a blockchain-based micropayments platform. Really interesting. It might help, and maybe micropayment. Maybe the problem with micropayment is there is no trusted third party that would work well enough for that. So in that case, cool, right? Blockchain might help. But I'm a bit dubious of people just sprinkling blockchain to say, yes, it's going to solve the problem when the problem is not necessarily the lack of a trusted third party.
Yeah, I agree. Sometimes, these blockchain projects, or at least some of them, are always like, it's like a solution looking for a problem, which is like,
Yeah.
not sure the centralized database always needs to solve this. But I find what I'd be more excited about is like going back to the previous idea of business models, like with Patreon slash Substack, where if you create, let's say the Waverly brand, it's trusted, then people can subscribe, pay with actual Canadian currency, and then they're able to benefit. I think that'd be more short term. Seems to make maybe a bit more sense.
Yeah. Yeah, again, I don't feel that Patreon's problem is that, we're not trusted as a brand. People don't want to deal with it. It's working pretty well.
What are you most excited about with what you guys are building right now?
I would say the fact that it's working. It's like the more we work on it, what I realize is there's this continuum between search and recommenders that people didn't notice before, but that does exist, right? People saw these two things as separate problems, separate technologies. You either build a recommendation system or you build a search engine. And Waverly is basically tracing a line between these two things and saying, well, maybe there is such a thing as a search query that defines you to such a level that you want it to live for a very, very long time and to influence a lot of systems in your life. So yeah, that's a bit what we realize. It's very exciting. The researcher in me, at least, finds that super exciting. I get to talk about this a lot with some of the top people working at TikTok, working at Facebook, working at Microsoft and Google on their recommendation engines, and most of the time I get these interrogation marks in their eyes. They're like, what are you talking about? This is not even a recommender engine, what you're talking about. So it's really breaking that like preconceived notion that everybody who's working in a recommender system has, that the recommender system is something that doesn't talk to you, right? So yeah, it's exciting. At the same time, it's a bit scary because people have tried experiments where they ask on Facebook, hey, give me, give the recommender some feedback, and the overwhelming response is people don't do that. They don't give feedback. They don't engage with this. So it's and so as a result, they just they turn away from this. They don't go towards these kind of recommender systems. And one of our hypotheses is, well, if you design it from the ground up to be about that ongoing conversation with your system, you have a higher chance of this succeeding than if you try to tackle it on something that was meant to be 100% behavior driven. So I don't know, like both exciting and scary, I guess, is the situation now.
Have you guys considered any like founding principles in terms of like your development in the code, like saying like here's like 3 things we will never do, right? We'll never like try and clickbait people or like trying to gain their attention, or is it too soon to say, hey, we can't put these principles in place?
Yeah, we don't have like a list of principles on the wall like that yet, but I would say there are like, it's very ingrained in the company's DNA. We have like our mission statement is, we want to understand people, help them achieve their goals, and get out of the way when we're not needed. This is how we put it to begin. And what I like about this is that it doesn't incorporate some things that you could see maybe eventually emerge as principles, right? This idea that we are about understanding people, whereas previous generation of technologies were about understanding the world, right? It's like what's Google's mission statement is understand the world information and make it universally accessible and useful, right? So it's definitely looking to the world, and it made sense because 20 years ago this was the challenge. The challenge was like there's way too much stuff out there. It's a mess. We need to organize it so that people can find what they want. But I think the next wave is about it's about us humans. It's about us humans in that world, and systems that can understand us, understand that we have goals, that we might not always behave in the best possible way to achieve these goals, but they still are our goals. That, yeah, our mission statement is about that. And then at the end, I just tackled this little sentence saying, "Get out of the way when we're not needed," just to make it clear that technology is the tool, not the objective, right? It's like if you want to spend more time with your family, you don't need your phone. You don't, just find a nice place, have a walk, and that's like we want to make it super clear that this is what we're about. We're not about like driving you towards technology. We're about understanding what your goals are, and then technology is going to play a role for sure in helping you achieve these goals. Let's try to be as good as we can towards that.
Yeah, I like that expression. Get out of the way, right? So it's like kind of the goal of technology: make your life easier, right? Not be embedded, staring at your screen 24/7, essentially.
Exactly.
Maybe a personal question, like after you've obviously started several startups. One of them was called Element AI, the last one, and like why another startup? So like I imagine you had a lot of battle scars and pay. You're like, so why decide another one? Like, what led you to that decision?
God, I don't know. I ask myself that question sometimes. Yeah, I think in this case, it was something that was so important for me. Like we were together at Google, right? And I was working on the very early days of like a very very simple recommender engine for Chrome, and I heard that sentence, watch what people do, don't listen to what they say, and I like immediately felt that this was wrong for, and I immediately started thinking about like, can we do that differently? And yeah, I guess after 4 years at Element AI working on the research group, I spent a lot of time on natural language systems. Um, I had this flash that it could be done now because we had this breakthrough in AI that allowed us to understand text at a much deeper level. We could finally build systems that could scale while listening to people and trying to understand them. So yeah, I guess it was just like the itch was too strong. I had, it's basically why I decided to ramp down my work at Element AI to start this new thing. Yeah, but sometimes I feel I had forgotten what it meant to be running a startup, all the uncertainties that came with it, all the stress that came with trying, like holding up a big vision and like struggling to find product market fit, trying to just like, what is it in the product that works? What is it that doesn't? Like, it's a lot of mental stress, yeah, but when the calling is strong enough, I guess you just have to do it.
Yeah, yeah. There was no other feeling, than being in the arena and battling the game. So I find, I understand that viewpoint. And thanks for the candor, Philip. Honestly, it's been a great conversation, and best of luck with what you guys are building. I find it's like when these startups where it's like, yeah, okay, we're building, X for Y, right? Uber for this or whatever, or like blockchain for that, and you're like, hey, but you guys have a real like raison d'être that's purposeful, and I find you have a few different paths, but just given the strong purpose. I feel like it's going to work no matter what. If I will be talking 2 years, they'll be like, you'll have a few hundred people and there'll be something working, So best of luck.
Thanks a lot, Nectar. Thanks.
Well, final question for, go ahead.
Yeah, just to close this off, if people are curious about what we're doing, the initial product we're building, I can just invite everybody to sign up on mywaverly.com. We have a little mailing list, and it doubles as our wait list for the product. Go there, sign up.
Well, I hope we actually go to Waverly Bar, where you guys got your name from. I believe that was the original, if that's the founding story of the brand. You guys had the idea at the bar, so you're like, hey, let's call it Waverly, which is obviously an iconic street in Montreal too. So
yeah, it was a code name. At first, we had so many meetings there, and then we had this brainstorm process. We tried a bunch of different names, and we just loved this one so much. For us, it captured yeah, not only where we started, but the vibe, the community vibe that you find there that we just wanted to, it was like, hey, here's Montreal reaching out to the world. If you come to Montreal, go walk on Waverly, try a bagel, and you'll be happy.
Philip, thanks so much for your time, and this is great.
You're very welcome, Nectar. Thanks for the opportunity.